Hi everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday. I want to wish you a very happy and prosperous new year. I would also like to thank you for listening to my videos and for your support. Please subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps my channel out. Thank you, and now let's get into some stories. So sit back, pull up those covers, and relax. I live in an old as dirt apartment building and used to have this cute little old Russian lady that lived next door to me. Sadly, she passed away and the apartment was empty for a good few months. I honestly didn't even realize someone had moved in till I was talking with one of the apartment managers and renewing my apartment for another year, and she asked if I met the new lady that lived next door to me. I told her I didn't even know someone moved in. She told me it was some girl around my age that had just moved from India, and she had a very pretty apartment with lots of red fabric hanging from the ceiling and such. I was like, oh, how nice. I wonder if she'd let me see. I've only ever seen pictures, but it always looks so nice. The apartment manager told me she wasn't too sure about that, and I asked why, to which she told me the girl was a bit odd. I just kind of laughed and asked how. Well, right as I'm asking, the office door swings open and in walks the girl we were just talking about. No knock, no can I come in, no warning, nothing. Just came right in and sat down in the chair next to me like I wasn't even there. Clearly, I was taken back by this and honestly thought it was kind of rude, but I didn't say anything as my apartment manager stepped in and told her she needs to knock and can't come in like that when she's helping someone else. She told her she would have to wait. She then told her I was the person who lived next door to her. She told her my name, I was very nice, etc. So I smiled and held out my hand for her to shake as she looks at me and said, "Hello, I'm Sydney. Nice to meet you." She just kind of sat there staring at me, looked at my hand like it was dirty or something, and gave me a dirty look till I took my hand back. She then tried to look at all my paperwork on the desk in front of us that had things like my social security number, birthday, full name, and lots of other private information she had no right to read. I picked up the stack and turned it over, saying, excuse me, those are personal. Please don't read them, and got an even dirtier look, like I was being rude for not wanting her to know my personal information when she wouldn't even say hello to me. She then asked the manager when I would be out so that she could have her time. She told her about 10 minutes. The girl says she'll wait. We say that's fine, and she doesn't move. We both just kind of stare at her and wait before the manager has to tell her she can't wait in the room while we do this, as it is private. She gets upset and walks out just barely outside the doorway to where the manager had to tell her to step back so she could close it without hitting her with the door. After this weirdness, things got creepy. How so? Well, let me list it. 1, she would quickly open her door to stare super intently at me half the time when I would leave my apartment. I had to pass her door to get to the apartment lobby. 2, she would stare super hard at me from around corners anytime I left my apartment to get the mail or talk to someone in the lobby, walk my dog, things like that. 3, she would come knocking on my door all hours of the night asking for money, and then would get mad when I didn't give her any. 4, when I stopped opening the door for her, she would stand outside my door and bang on it for like 5 to 10 minutes straight, till I threatened to call the cops on her for doing it at almost 4 in the morning. It didn't stop her from doing it again. 5, she would have random guys over all day, every day, for like an hour or 2. I kind of got the feeling she might have been prostituting, but never had any proof. If she saw me out in the hall when she was with these men, she'd stop, point at me, say something to them in another language, then they'd always give me a super creepy smirk and eye me before following her inside. I didn't have a clue as to what she was telling them, but I don't think it was good going off that look. I should say I'm a halfway good-looking small woman, so having a creepy dude look at me like that right outside my door is a bit unsettling. 6, after 2 years of this, I finally got fed up with her crap and started asking if she had a staring problem or if she needed something when she would follow me or stare at me like some kind of creeper. The weird, super creepy, overjoyed smile she would give me after might have been the creepiest thing she did. 7, she would randomly pretend not to understand English just out of nowhere, even though she spoke and understood it amazingly well, but would just randomly pretend not to understand. And if you called her out on it, and she knew you knew she understood, she'd give you this dirty, hate-filled look and say something to the effect of, "Yeah, so what?" I really didn't understand the logic behind this. And then finally, she got new furniture every freaking month. I wish I was making this up. The amount of times I was woken up or blocked from being able to leave my apartment because she had the hall filled with furniture that she had gotten was unsettling. The final straw on this was when she legit leaned a couch against my apartment door without asking, since I'm sure you could guess I would have said no, and it almost crushed me when I opened my door to see what was blocking my peephole. I'm sure you can imagine my shock. Cops were called, filed a formal complaint, and she was told she was no longer allowed to change her house around every month since it was now endangering the people living around her and a lease violation for it. Her protest to this was to leave said couch, she almost crushed me with, on the sidewalk. For 3 weeks, from what I was told, she got 3 big tickets, one a week after being warned to remove it many times, and another lease violation since the apartment was ticketed for it being a fire hazard or something like that. It wasn't just me she did this to, but I was her main target living right next door and all. Then one day, poof, I wasn't seeing her anymore. I was honestly super happy and couldn't care less where she went, but I would be lying if I said I didn't get curious after not seeing her for a month and a half, not knowing if she was still living there or not. So I asked the apartment manager and was told she didn't pay her rent the month before. When they went to check on her, the apartment was empty. No note was left, no telling where she went. I have no clue how she did this without me or anyone for that matter noticing, since I didn't hear a peep, no moving sounds or anything, and didn't see her moving anything either. It was pretty creepy and unsettling. I'm really not sure, thinking about it, if she was mentally all right or not, or just hated living in the apartment or what. I just kind of hope she's okay and something bad didn't happen to her, and also kind of hope I never see her again either. The chick just wasn't right. The day he moved in, I went over to the house and introduced myself. It's a fairly rural area outside of a small town, and I like to know who is living in one of the only houses that are within sight of mine. I meet him, and right off the bat, I get really bad vibes from this dude. There's nothing he did then that I can point to and say that made me feel that way, but I felt extremely uncomfortable in his presence and got out of there as quickly as I politely could. That same night, it was past 2 a.m., I get a loud knock on my door that wakes me up. I don't answer it because I'm not stupid, but I go to the door and call out, "Who's there?" No one answers, and the knocking continues, louder. I ask again, "Who is it?" And still nothing but more knocking. I yell out that they can leave or I'll call the police. The knocking immediately stops, and there's nothing but silence. I want to open the door to look out, but I don't because I'm positive whoever it is still out there. I stay by the door until morning and don't go to sleep. The next day, I go to the new neighbor's house and ask him if it was him knocking. This is again a pretty rural area and he's the only suspect. He admits to it immediately. I ask him why he was doing it, why he didn't answer me, and what he wanted. He gets evasive and doesn't really answer. I'm still creeped the F out and my feelings of discomfort from meeting him are only stronger. But I explain to him, still trying to be polite, that I don't like being bothered and that if he has any issue, that he needs to call our landlord. We have the same one, rather than come to me. He agrees and apologizes. My dumbass thinks he got the message, but this is only the start of a pattern of behavior that would go on for over a year. After that, this man constantly bothered me. I literally could not go outside to check my mail without him coming over to my yard and just standing there staring at me. Every time I left the house to go somewhere, he'd start coming over and I eventually just started ignoring him, getting in my car and taking off as quickly as possible. It was like he was constantly watching my house, just waiting for me to go outside. He would also walk the road and stop in front of my house, just staring at it from behind the bushes, and I would sometimes go out to find him already in my yard, just loitering around. Mostly he didn't talk to me, but when he did, he would ask me personal questions, mainly, do you have a boyfriend? Are you looking for a boyfriend? I would lie and say I did, and he would press me for details about this boyfriend, which I would evade doing. I also continued to occasionally get random knocks on my door in the middle of the night. I knew it was him. I never answered the door. I was absolutely positive something horrible would happen to me if I did. It was extremely uncomfortable and suffocating to live with. I told him repeatedly to stop, at first politely, but eventually I got angrier the more it went on. One time I was on my knees in my garden pulling weeds and looked up to find him just standing over me, staring me down, and was so startled I went off on him and yelled at him. It made him leave me alone for a few days, but then the behavior continued. I told our landlord about it multiple times, and the landlord told the guy to leave me alone multiple times, but that also had no effect. I talked to a cop who I knew and was told there was nothing I could do unless the guy actually threatened me or assaulted me. Being annoying isn't a crime, he told me. He has to actually do something. I got to the point that I finally started looking for new places to live. The reason why I didn't beforehand was because rent here is really cheap, and I didn't think I could afford to find anything at that same price, and I've lived here for so long. I genuinely like this house and the rest of the neighborhood. It's my home and I didn't want to leave, but I felt like I had no choice. It was then that, seemingly out of the blue, the creepy neighbor up and moved. Apparently he'd been majorly behind on rent and other bills and decided to just skip out rather than wait for the landlord to evict him. I felt an immediate wave of relief the second I found out he was gone. When the landlord went in to clean the house out after he left, he found it in a total state of disarray. Burnt foil and burnt spoons everywhere, broken liquor bottles, holes in the walls and floors, feces smeared on cabinets, unidentified stains on the carpet. You get the gist. He ended up completely remodeling the house because it was so destroyed inside. That took over a year, and the next person to move in, my current neighbor, is the ideal person to live next to. Keeps to himself, never bothers me. I barely know what he looks like because I see him so little. As for my old neighbor, unfortunately, he still lives in the area, and I still see him around town at the gas station or at the store. Mostly, I try to avoid him to the point that I'll drive to a store in the next town over if I see him in a parking lot. But He's caught me and tried to talk to me several times, and it's always uncomfortable. He still stares more than he talks and still creeps me out. Kathy and Bill were this old couple who lived next door to us in a trailer when I was growing up. They'd gotten together later in life, and we didn't know much about them. Over the years, their stories took weird turns. They were both creepy and sad, and a little evil too. These people used to babysit me when I was younger. They preferred my brother and used to tell me really effed up crap like, "You are so wicked and evil, and one day the ground is going to open up and swallow you whole." They would punish me for fighting with my mom or getting into trouble at home the day before. I'd be sent to a room and told to sit on the bed and stay there. Kathy would take my brother out to the park or out for ice cream while I sat alone in the room. Bill was usually watching TV in the living room. She'd rub it in my face, telling me good kids get ice cream and bad children get naps. It was all about my brother and what he wanted to do. If I even disagreed for a minute, I was treated like dirt. Eventually, it got so bad I just refused to go over there anymore, and my mom allowed me to stay home by myself after school. Now for the creepy crap. She was the definition of a nosy neighbor. We'd look out our windows and see her looking back at us most of the time, windows open in winter, trying to hear what was going on at our house. One time she told my brother to ask my father to trim the bushes because I can't see what's going on over at your place anymore. That's when Dad stopped cutting the bushes altogether. She would hear my dad yell at us over something and call a few minutes later to see what we did. Kathy told us she had one son from her previous marriage. He had been around a bit here and there. One day she was crying to my mom on the phone and told her that he had died in a car accident. Imagine our surprise several years later when he turned up again to make amends with her. They had had a fight and she told everybody he had died. People felt bad for her, they prayed for her, they brought her food and checked on her, and she had been lying the entire time. Bill was also a creep. There was a night I woke up and saw him standing at the edge of the property line looking straight into my bedroom window, which was only about 10 feet away. I started covering it with blankets. My parents assured me that he was just a senile old man and probably wasn't creeping. There was another situation where I was laying out in the sun, probably more over on his side of the property line than my own, but our yard was very small, and the property owner allowed us to use 5 or so feet of her yard as our own, and we had a friendly agreement with her that Kathy and Bill were told to honor. There was to be none of that kids out of my yard bull. So I'm lying there listening to music in the sun, and I suddenly get kicked very hard in my side. I sit up and grab my side because it hurt. Bill's yelling obscenities at me and walks away. I forgot to add that Bill also had children of his own and said he hadn't seen them in years. Once he died, Kathy became very lonely. She started pulling crap to get people to come to her house, like asking for help that she really didn't need. One time she called 911 because she was out of bacon and couldn't drive to the store in the winter. The town marshal showed up with groceries for her. That's when she told him she'd only needed the bacon because she was craving it, not that she didn't have any food at all. Eventually, these antics got to be too much for everyone, and people were called in to determine her mental health situation. She was taken to a home to be cared for by the state because she had no family who could care for her or even make the decision to put her in a home. I don't know where her son was at this point, maybe dead again. When they were cleaning out her room, they found birth certificates and evidence that she did have other children than her son, children with another man a lifetime ago, children who hated their mother and never wanted to see her again, apparently. I heard they found 5 birth certificates in all. Actually, it was 2 neighbors. I think they were boyfriend and girlfriend or son and mother. I would believe either one. She was the classic after meth picture. Stringy, greasy, dirty blonde hair, thin cheeks, wrinkles everywhere. He was a skinny rat man with a patchy goatee. Anyway, I was living in the top apartment and they were the floor directly below me in a 6-story building. The apartment below them was empty. I was just a college kid at the time, so I didn't really think much about it. I had a roommate, Brad. Well, things started getting weird when every time I would walk down the steps and past their door, there was the rat man standing outside the door. He was usually nice, like weird nice. He would say weird crap like, "Good afternoon, sir, how are you?" Even though I was 20 or so and he had to be 30 or 40 years old. I was pleasant enough and always said hi. Increasingly, it was not just him, but a group of 3 to 4 people hanging outside the door. I guess I started suspecting something was up when my plants started dying. It was summer and we didn't have AC, so the windows were open and there was always a weird smell coming in from the living room window. I'm not saying it was fumes or anything, but it made sense later. Things started getting more interesting when the fights began. They would have the loudest arguments starting around 4 a.m. This was not lovemaking, this was them yelling at the top of their lungs how she was going to cut open his skull with a meat cleaver. Some really messed up crap. Then they would slam the doors. I think they went into 2 different rooms and have stereo wars. We did call our landlord and he stopped by and asked them to keep it down. Eventually things got a lot darker. Remember the people outside the door? Well, that was during the day. At night, 1 to 2 people would stop by and pound on the door like they were hoping to break it down. Then they would yell, "I know you're in there. I want my stuff. I'm not leaving till I get it. Open up or I'm coming back to shoot you in the effing head," and so on and so forth for the next hour or 2. This happened around 50% of the nights. We called the cops, they would pull up, the guys would sort of shut up when they see them coming and nothing to see here. Well, that sort of crazy death threats from meth tweakers gets old pretty fast. My landlord didn't want anything to do with them and so he wouldn't do anything as long as they paid the rent. We ended up moving out of there 3 months early because we didn't want to die from random bullets or fumes or apartment fires. No deal on the lease, had to pay for that effed up place the full term. Maybe that was the landlord's plan. The crazies aren't leaving and the honest college kids don't have the money to fight me on it. So, there you go. My entire life growing up, we had this neighbor who was a real jerk. He absolutely hated us with every fiber of his being. I would ride my bike around the neighborhood when I was like 7 or 8, and if I came within 2 feet of his yard, he threatened to shoot me, or he threw his boot at me. I kind of taunted him by getting really close to his lawn, just to tick him off. Our dog would bark once at something, and he would call the cops and threaten to shoot the dog. He thought our TV was loud, called the cops. Came home too late, and the light on our porch went on. You guessed it, called the cops. It got so bad that the cops started ignoring him. Of course, if this didn't give away that he was an old man, I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, he got sick one day and had to go into a home where he's still apparently a huge pain in the neck. So his family went to clean out his house and they got to the garage. Keep in mind, he lived in the neighborhood since the 50s or so, maybe longer. They ended up finding this hidden room in the garage, and inside was literally over 1,000 balls. Beach balls, basketballs, footballs, baseballs, any kind you can think of. Every ball that ever went in his yard, if you didn't sneak in and get it back, he took and held captive. That's not the creepiest part. The creepiest thing was they were looking through his basement and they found a box of like 40 journals, and every one of them was full, completely written in. With what, you ask? Every single thing my family ever did. Every move we made. If we opened the front door, he wrote it down. If he heard a noise from our house, he wrote it down. We were basically his Truman Show, watching every move we made since we moved in. We lived next to him for 19 years before he went into the home, and he especially hated my dad. Whenever my dad did something, he wrote it down and wrote nasty comments about him. His family asked us if we wanted them, and we told them absolutely not. Oh, and when we were on vacation once, the guy set the flowers on the side of our house, facing his house, on fire. I used to live in a flat with a shared back deck with the lower unit. Sometime after the house was built and then turned into flats, the landlord also built a multi-unit building, essentially in the backyard. So we lived in a nice old converted house in a great neighborhood, but these backyard apartments were not as nice and much cheaper. Their front windows looked out into our backyard. The guy living on the third floor was in his 50s or 60s and a raging alcoholic. One night, my neighbor and I were sitting on our shared back deck talking about a jazz show coming up, so as you can imagine, it was not a very loud or rowdy conversation. The drunk neighbor leaned out of his window and started screaming at us to shut up. My nice neighbor said, quite calmly, that we were simply enjoying our deck and not making any unreasonable amount of noise. I'm a girl and super relaxed, so I didn't really say anything. The drunk neighbor stormed out to the yard and started screaming. I mean, really screaming. He had a baseball bat and said he was going to murder us. I ran up into my place and called the cops while the nice neighbor tried to calm him down. It clearly didn't work because I heard the baseball bat destroying my back door while I was on the phone. 10 minutes later, he had just about beaten through the door and I had to call 911 again. This time, they took it a bit more seriously and 2 cars showed up a few minutes later. There was a bit of a scuffle and they arrested him, then took my statement. When I went back downstairs, my door was completely destroyed. He was about 30 seconds away from getting through and murdering me to death when the cops showed up. We live in a nice, newer, middle-class, Midwest U.S. boring neighborhood. Of the 150 plus homes here, everyone's nice to each other, except that one family, naturally, my neighbors. I could go on and on with years' worth of bad neighbor stories like stealing our electricity or mowing the lawn at 1 a.m. or their kids smashing in our mailbox right in front of me. But this is a creepy thread. So, when they were finally evicted, these crackheads who had been without basic utilities for months in the summer left behind the most awful scene I thought I'd ever see. Inside the house, they had not only torn out every wall looking for copper wiring, had stripped every fixture, sold every appliance, but they'd also stopped using the bathroom. There was feces everywhere. But that's not the worst of it. One of the police officers and I were friendly with each other, and since we'd called the cops about a dozen times against these people, he let me take a look inside. The stench was nearly overpowering. In the hallways, the closets, and the basement were the corpses of countless tiny little animals. How people live like that, I'll never know. Drugs, I guess. I lived in a 4-unit building. The person who lived there the longest was friends with the landlord, and unbeknownst to me, the landlord gave him copies of all of our keys for, quote, emergencies. The long-term tenant kept inviting me places, holding my packages for me in his apartment, and bringing me cookies. I always gently rejected him. He watched my comings and goings from his porch upstairs and always commented on my bags or how long I was gone. My sister came and visited, and I was giving them directions on how to find my place, and he came outside right before they arrived and watched them getting out of the car and walking in. I think he could hear everything I said in my apartment. I started noticing weird things like one day my bedroom window was open. I never open windows because I hate bugs. I just use the AC. Another time my TV was off when I left it on, but I just chalked it up to electronics. Then there was a pen from a Hilton in Cancun on my kitchen floor. I had never been there, and it was 100% not my pen. Well, I ended up calling the landlord and asked him if he was in my apartment, and he said no. I told him all of the weird things, and he gave excuses for all of it. Finally, one day I came home from work, and there was a set of keys on the ground just in front of my back door. I picked them up and tried them, and they were from my apartment. Well, I called the landlord and was furious, and he told me they were probably the upstairs neighbor's emergency set. Well, I moved out within a week. We live in a pretty bad city, and even though we've been here for 3 years, and these neighbors have been here longer than us, this recently started happening at the beginning of quarantine. We have a big backyard that needs a lot of maintenance, and the garage is located there as it's not attached to the house. So it's just a constant journey of going back and forth for laundry and things. So we go back there a lot to take care of those things, especially my mom. When my mom is back there, the next door neighbor's door swings open and he comes out just to stand there and smoke. At first, we thought it was just a coincidence, but it kept happening and happening and happening. Without missing a beat, he'd come out of his house when he'd hear my mom go back there to do laundry, cut the grass, clean the grill, etc. Then he started looking over the fence to stare. My mom tried saying hi at first, but he didn't respond. He just stared. I was grabbing my bike from the garage and saw him standing on his tippy toes to look at me while he smoked. One night, we were finishing up making dinner, and because our window looks over to the neighbor's house, we saw him standing there, smoking and staring right into our house. We had to put up a sheet for the window after that. Things seemed to get worse. He whistled at and followed my mom. She went to the garage to get her laundry, and he followed along the side on the other side of the fence while staring over the fence at her, pretty much making her run back into the house and have a panic attack. Well, just yesterday, I went outside to talk to a family friend who dropped off his car, and as soon as I began to talk, our neighbor came out of his house, but because of the family friend, he went right back in after standing around for a while. We're all creeped out, and my mom and I are too scared to go to the backyard or front yard by ourselves. We're all creeped out, and my mom and I are too scared to go to the backyard or the front yard by ourselves. We always have to take one of my brothers with us or have them go instead in dead silence so he won't hear. I even had a nightmare about him staring over the fence at one of my brothers, and it woke me up in cold sweats and I had anxiety. Our other neighbor, who is in the same house as that guy, told us that creepy neighbor and the other men in her household are up to no good, and we should try avoiding them. We desperately plan on moving out soon, but for now, we're putting up a clothesline rope with sheets and towels to block his view of our backyard and of us. It just stinks that we can't feel safe in our own home right now, and we can't even confront him due to the fact that they're probably dangerous people to deal with. I can't wait to get out of here. In our last apartment complex, there was some kind of halfway house situation where several of our neighbors were mentally ill or they were rehab patients that were transitioning back into the real world. Some were entertaining in an odd but harmless way, and some gave off vaguely unsettling vibes, but I was never terribly scared of any of them for months. We gave them nicknames. Slow Walker was hugely overweight and always in the same cut-off sweatpants and t-shirt, but was friendly and had a sweet dog. Portly Gentleman was hilariously naively forward about wanting a girlfriend. And then, in the unit underneath us, and by far the creepiest of the lot, was Voodoo Lady. For months, she was essentially harmless. Creepy, but harmless. I was up at 6 a.m. for work every day, and without fail, she would be out in her thin nightgown, sitting in her chair outside smoking. I'd come home, she'd be in the same spot, in the same nightgown. It was rare to find her chair empty than it was to find it occupied. She'd talk to herself a lot, and more than once, when I'd be watching TV in our living room, I'd hear her yelling at no one. It was disconcerting, but I never really felt unsafe. That is, until one morning. I was woken up at about 4 a.m. to what I thought was my roommate having a loud argument with her boyfriend over the phone. I assumed it was over the phone because I only heard one voice, but wow, it was loud. Once I was fully awake, it became apparent it wasn't the roomie. It was, in fact, coming from the apartment below us. For a good 2.5 hours, I listened to violent yelling and screaming, doors slamming, furniture being thrown, all from this one woman. She had some kind of fight with herself for almost 3 hours, and looking back on it now, it seems kind of silly, but at the time, it was horrifying. I had to leave for work, and I was terrified of having to walk down the stairs that happened to be right in front of her door.